welcome those who will be joining us via YouTube for the Moorhead Church of Christ Wednesday evening Bible study. We are studying a series of lessons on the book of Judges. And the book of Judges obviously has relevance to us today. They were God's people way back in the day, and they were following God, and hey, we're God's people today, and we're following God, and we can sort of learn from the good things that they did, the things they got right, and the things that they got wrong, and we can essentially look at that and really see really what God wants and what he doesn't want. And so the book becomes relevant today, even though it is part of the ancient history of Israel. So we're going to be in Judges chapter 6 today, and with Judges chapter 6 begins the fourth cycle of the Judges. Israel, having given into evil again, is now being oppressed by the Midianites, and God raises up the next judge of Israel, who is Gideon, to deliver Israel from their oppressors. So what we have here is really an extended passage in 3 chapters, 6, 7, and 8, of the Gideon, the judge of Israel, essentially his judgeship. So we began this last week, and we actually read through 1 through 10, so we won't read through all those verses again for the sake of time, but the part where we pick it up here is that is recognizing the first 10 verses is that the oppression of the Midianites was great. They oppressed Israel for some 7 years. It seems to be, from what we read earlier, even more harsh than other oppressors. And essentially, the children of Israel finally cried out to the Lord. Remember that when they have oppressors, their enemies are oppressing them, it's not because God wanted that to be the case. Their enemies are being allowed to oppress them because they have turned their back on God and they are worshiping pagan idols. And God does not approve of that, and God is allowing these enemies really to give severe oppression to them. And by crying out to God, essentially it is recognizing we're wrong, we're going to change our ways, and God, can you save us from our terrible predicament? And so we're going to start today first in verse 11 with the angel of the Lord going to Gideon. So I want to have someone read 11 through 14. Jenna, would you like to do that? And Brian, 15 through 18. Okay.
Then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior." Then Gideon said to him, "O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the land of Midian, or the hand of Midian." And the Lord looked at him and said, "Go in this your strength, and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you?"
And then 15 through 18, yep.
And he said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." And the Lord said to him, "But I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man." And he said to him, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you." And he said, I will stay till you return."
All right, very good. So, again, this is the purpose of this visit with the angel of the Lord coming to Gideon is to appoint him as the next judge of Israel. He'll be the 5th judge of Israel. And we've seen the angel of the Lord already back in chapter 2. So the angel of the Lord is coming to Gideon. Remember that the angel of the Lord is really deity, and we can sort of see that in what's going to be said here in this meeting with Gideon. What's that?
I was telling you I'm part of the Godhead, the angel of the Lord.
Yeah, so we're talking about deity, and a lot of people believe that the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament is the pre-incarnate Christ, and obviously that has a lot of weight to it, seeing that we don't see any of the really the pre-incarnate Christ really at all in the Old Testament, other than the references to the angel of the Lord. So it mentions here that he goes to a place called Ophrah, and this is a city. This is from Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary, a city west of the Jordan River, and it's occupied by the Bezerites, a family of the tribe of Manasseh. And so when you go to look for this on a Bible map, sometimes it's on there, sometimes it's not, or there's a question mark. In other words, they're not really certain exact location. We see that Gideon is mentioned, and that he is the son of a man named Joash. And that's about all that we know about Joash, other than what's going to be said about him later. The word Joash means Jehovah supports. And the idea is that they are from this Bezerite family. And so the action of Gideon in beating out the wheat, and we want to look at that. Do you see anything unusual about the fact that Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites? He was beating out in a winepress. What's unusual about that?
Because you don't do that in the wine press.
Okay, well, what do you normally do with a winepress?
Crush grapes.
Okay, so basically you have an upper section that's carved out. You put all your fresh grapes in there. There's a hole in there, and there's a section below there to catch all the juice. And how do we get all of the juice out of the grapes?
Step on them.
Step on them. So, it only hurts when you think about it. So you wash your feet, and you go in there, you step on all the grapes, and then all of the juice goes down to the second
That's
level.
not how they do it today, though, isn't it?
I don't want to say, probably not in America. Maybe there are places in the world that still do that. You'd be surprised what happens in third world countries. A lot of the very
I don't drink wine anymore, but
just very archaic ways of doing things. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I mean, if everybody was doing that, then you wouldn't think anything about it. If that's how you got it, you're like, oh, wow, when you get done scraping that, you're crushing those grapes, can I get a glass of that? You don't think about how it was done.
now back then that was grape juice too.
Yeah.
Old Testament.
They're just crushing fresh grapes. That's what the wine press was.
Uh-huh.
And here we have Gideon, and he's beating out wheat there. So we got to think about why he would be doing that. Why are you doing that? Where do they normally beat out wheat? By that, we're talking about separating the wheat from the kernels and the stalk.
Isn't that thing that they have horses or oxen that
But
go
where
around,
is that done at?
like in the field?
Okay, you're like on a threshing floor, so you have this hard surface, and yeah, you could have a donkey or an ox or whatever on a pole, and essentially go around, and you could put things like that, or you could get the stalks and you could essentially beat them out or shake them out, and then on a windy day you could, once you beat them out, you could sort of throw it up in the wind, and then you separate the kernel from the husk, and essentially the kernel falls down and the husk flows away. So they figured out a way to sort of process wheat in ancient times, which would be really hard work if you think about it. So we can sort of see from this, in the location in which Gideon is doing this, how bad the conditions are. So you're not going to, if going back to verses 4 through 5, that basically the Midianites came really to destroy the crops, to really make it hard for them, take what they wanted, then we've got to go to some out of the way place. So if you're going to some rocky area, to process your grapes. This might be a good place to process your wheat, because at least you wouldn't be out in the open where the Midianites could see you and essentially take whatever they want after you do all the work. Okay, so it's just really, the Bible writer puts that in there, just really indicates really how difficult the times are, because that's just not normally the place where you process grain. Verse 12, it says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior." And so you got to think about it from, Gideon's, all of a sudden he's busy doing this, and this is said to him. If we want to have an understanding about the Lord is with you, just look at verse 17. Gideon understands what it means. He said, "If now I have found favor in your sight." And so the idea is that favor has fallen upon Gideon. And as we read the text, we recognize Gideon is the one that has been chosen by the Lord, the task of leading Israel from freedom, from the tyranny of the Midianites. He is valiant in the sense the word means sort of bravery or boldness or courage. And so essentially, he is the one that is going to do this. And anytime we read about the Lord choosing somebody for a particular task, we're essentially recognizing that he, in the Lord's estimation, is the best man for the job. Whoever the Lord picks for whatever thing that he wants them to do, just like the prior judges, that is the best choice of everybody you have to work with at the time. Okay? Verse 13, it says, "Then Gideon said to him, O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all of this happened to us? And where are all the miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." And so what we need to understand is what's going on here. The idea is Gideon does not know yet that essentially he's the chosen one to free Israel. Okay, so Gideon's question here must be put into context, goes back to verses 6 and 7, with the sons of Israel crying out to the Lord for deliverance. Verses 6 and 7 imply repentance, and that God is now with Israel once again, or Gideon would not have been chosen to be a judge to free them from the Midianites. But here in verse 13, Gideon wonders why no deliverance has taken place as of yet. Well, guess what? Gideon, the angel of the Lord, is like, guess why I'm here? You're the man. You're going to be the one. It isn't that God hasn't not heard the cry of Israel. He has. It's a time for action, and it's always based on God's timetable, not on man's timetable. And Gideon's like, well, if this is the case, why haven't, if we cried out there, why hasn't all this happened? Because it wasn't time yet. And now it's time, and you're the guy, right?
I was just gonna say, so Gideon must be a righteous person then. So even though most of them were wicked, there were still righteous people.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that could be said, looking at all of God's people, even in the worst of times with the kings, you always had the prophets and a few others, even Elijah. Elijah thought he was the only one. God said there's 7,000 others who have bowed the knee. So he's obviously a man that is a righteous man. He has found favor with God. So
well,
yeah.
I just thought it was interesting because he would know then why God hasn't been with him, and yet he still asks.
Well, the thing is he's acknowledging that Israel's reached out to God, but we don't have a time frame. In other words, okay, when Israel finally came to his senses spiritually and cried out for God's help, how long was it from that time to this time? So we don't know, but we know it was the right time. And Gideon is thinking that, if you're with us, how come none of this has happened? Well, because it wasn't the time. And as things have been working so far, we need to have a judge. And you're the guy. Okay? So
Is
very
that
good.
what God says?
What's that?
Is that what God said?
Right. So the angel of the Lord is coming there because he's going to appoint Gideon as the next judge. And he's going to be the one that leads the children of Israel out of the freedom from the
Well, how
oppression
long
of
have
the-
they quit serving fake gods now, though, that you're talking about? What?
Yeah, well, they were under Midian oppression for 7 years, so they obviously had gotten away from the Lord before that. Remember, after each judge, it seems like when the judge dies, the
Yeah,
children of
they go
Israel
back
go
to their
back.
gods.
Right. So now they've been under this oppression by their own fault for 7 years, and it's been very, very difficult.
Yeah, because of disobedience.
Yep, and these are especially harsh oppressors. Okay, verse 14, it says, and the Lord looked at him, that's Gideon, and said, go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? In other words, there you go. Okay, you're going to be the one that breaks Israel free. And so what God is doing is appointing Gideon. He's confident in Gideon. He is essentially saying that when you go forward and carry this out, I'm going to be with you and you're going to be successful. And so really the Lord has honored Gideon highly by choosing him out of all the other Israelites for this important mission. My question to you is, what should have Gideon's response for such a gracious privilege from the Lord have been? What should have his response been?
Mine should have been
That the Lord came to him and said, I'm going to appoint you for this mission to save your nation. And Gideon should have did what?
been faithful and believe that he's going to deliver them.
Okay, well, he had to have been faithful for God
And
to
believe
pick him,
that.
right? He should have believed it, right?
He should have been really grateful, showing his gratitude or whatever.
Right. The idea that God had such great confidence and honored him so highly in choosing him out of all the other Israelites.
Yeah, I was gonna say he should have praised the Lord and said, all right, let's go do this.
Yeah. I mean, that's the part that would have been something that would have been really encouraging to read, but that's not what we're going to read. And so it gets interesting.
Kind of reminds me of Moses in a way.
Yeah, it does. It's very much so. Verse 15, the Bible writer really records what Gideon says here. But Gideon said to him, that's the angel of the Lord, O Lord, how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh. In other words, here is sort of the weakest of families. That's what the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew lexicon brings out, or the poorest. And he says, on top of that, I am the youngest in my father's house. And the idea here, again, with the Hebrew word here, Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew English lexicon, means that he's little or insignificant. The idea of that's how how insignificant you've chosen me. And look at that, we're the least of the house of Manasseh, and I'm even the youngest in my
The
father's
Lord's going to
house.
strike down the Midianites, is what it says.
What's that?
The Lord's going to strike down these people so he can overtake them.
Yeah, well, we're not to that point yet. We got problems with the leader. Okay, so the leader's got issues. And what do you see in Gideon's response?
No
What
faith.
is he doing? What's that?
He don't have no faith in God.
Okay, he is weak in faith, right?
I
Did you hear
said
something?
excuses.
Okay, it's really excuses, right? In other words, you got the wrong guy. I mean, why else would you say this? You're finding, how many people start out by essentially talking themselves out of such a privilege like that? You got the wrong guy, man. Look at my family. You know, we're the weakest of the tribe of Manasseh. I'm the youngest of my family. We can essentially say you got the wrong guy. But here's what I want to think about: is God always acts in unconventional ways. I mean, remember David. Okay, he was the second king of Israel. Remember, Samuel goes to there and he starts seeing the sons of Jesse. And at some point he says, look at the stature of this son right here. This has got to be the guy.
Well, it's just like today. People don't believe they can get through things. You know, they have God. You know,
Right.
They don't have that much faith. If we're not grateful, you know, God can get you through anything,
Right.
no matter how bad it looks.
If God chose Gideon, what does that mean about Gideon himself. It means that essentially he has not only the potential,
Yeah.
but the capability, because God is going to be with him. In other
God
words,
knows what he's doing.
right. So if essentially God is your army, it won't matter how many are on the other side. If God has chosen you and he's going to be with you, you act in faith. You don't make excuses saying, look at my position in society. I have a lowly position. And the thing is, God didn't get it wrong.
Stiff-necked people and stuff, and that's what it is too, because he's not believing, that
Yeah.
the Lord can help him through all this stuff.
Yeah, I think the real problem is not so much stiff-necked, but he's afraid. And the words will kind of bear that out as we go here, that he is really fearful of the responsibility that he's been given. But I want to go back to the idea that Gideon was an unconventional choice, and something God brought to Samuel's attention. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 6 and 7, it says, then it came about when they entered that he looked at Eliab, that is Samuel the prophet, and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature. Don't let the externals get you, because I have rejected him. In other words, he looks like the guy that should be it. And then he says what we should know well, for God sees what? Not as man sees. Okay, for man looks where? Outward. Where is Gideon looking at? Well, I'm from the weakest family, Manasseh, and I'm the youngest of my family, okay?
God looks from the inside.
That's
of the
it.
heart.
For man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. There was something about Gideon. It's one thing if he's humble, it's another thing if he's afraid, but the idea that God has chosen you and God is going to be behind you should take care of all the fear.
Basically the same story that Moses gave.
Yeah, essentially they're excuses, and God wasn't taking excuses. In other words, I'm going to send you, and I'm going to be with you, and the idea is those excuses are not going to change my mind. You're the guy. You need to just sort of be strong in faith and do essentially what I've called you to do. And Gideon is certainly capable of doing it, but essentially his fear is causing him really to make the wrong decision about moving forward here. In other words, he's thinking, nope, it's not me. You got the wrong guy. Perhaps you should reconsider and get somebody else. And I want you to think about this as we think about the idea of being afraid. Is there lessons for us in the church today?
Well, yeah, that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah, well, that's what I want to talk about too.
Fear. When something happens, and I've been talking about this too, something happens, whatever it is, you get through a storm,
Yep.
and then something else happens. We need to think about how we got through the last storm
Okay.
and stuff to help us. Fear is false evidence appearing real.
Okay.
And the devil uses this, and we're supposed to trust God no matter what it is, no
Right.
matter how bad it is.
Yep.
We're supposed to trust God through the situation
Sure.
and stuff, and it always panels out.
Okay.
God always gives us what we need, and
Sure.
He'll always say He's our stronghold, as the song says.
Yeah.
So why should we worry about anything? We can be concerned, but we need. A man that worries is not right in God. So
Right.
we need to try to trust more and not fear, because the devil uses that to his advantage. The devil looks at the weaknesses of man
Right.
and uses it to his advantage.
Yeah.
So he ponders what a man does,
Yep.
the weaknesses and stuff. So we should be on guard against that. So not to doubt God.
Okay, very good. So how about some other things, like what if we're afraid to carry out the Great Commission? Don't we all have a responsibility to carry out the Great Commission? What happens if we're afraid to do that?
Fall from grace.
Basically, we have lost people that are around us that are never going to be saved. And the thing is if God gives us a Great Commission, we obviously have the ability to do it. And what holds us back is fear. And the thing is that that's not going to bless our lives. God uses us to essentially evangelize we are capable of doing that. If we don't, essentially it's not going to bless our lives because we're not going to bring Jesus into the lives of others. What about confessing Jesus before the world? If somebody says, you know, how come you don't do this or don't do that? You say, well, I just wasn't raised that way. Why not say, because I'm a Christian? Why are we afraid to just say what it really is? Why would we be afraid to do that? Because if we deny Christ before men, what's going to happen at the throne of God?
Are you asking me? Or?
Well, I'm just asking John.
Oh.
We're going to be denied
Yeah.
before the Father, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna use another example, and I mean, even inside of the church, like, you know, when there's a need for men to step up and help during the worship or
Yep.
something like that, instead
Yep.
of holding back and having somebody else do it,
Right.
you gotta have the mentality of like, hey, I can do this. There's a
Okay.
need for it. I'm capable and willing to do it. I'm gonna do it.
Right? So we're really trying about, you know, overcoming fear. And I think another one here, and we could probably add a lot of them here, is what about confronting brethren that are in sin? There's a fear.
I had to
about
do that last night, and I had
Yeah.
to tell the truth.
Yep.
And whether they liked it or not,
right?
I told the truth,
Right?
and I was called a hypocrite.
Yep.
But I told the truth. You know, you got to tell the truth, and that's what
Right.
I said. I please God. I don't please
Sure.
men, and that's just how it is.
Right.
You know, you're in
Right.
sin, basically, is
Yeah.
and stuff. So you know, we have to, especially the church, we have to
Yeah.
tell the truth, because
And tell the truth.
if we comfort them with a lie,
Right?
then they get comfortable with lies. And
Right.
as you know, if you get comfortable with one habitual sin, more and more comes in.
Yeah. So
And-
you're not, when you're afraid to confront sin in a brother or sister's life, you're not helping them.
So
You could be accused of enabling them. You could be accused of, and some people say, well, you know, it's not a loving thing to do. Well, you tell me how it's loving to allow a brother or sister to practice sin when you know they're in sin, knowing that they're going to be condemned for practicing that sin. What if you know, you have you know, brethren that are not getting along? The idea is that we can't be afraid of trying to reconcile differences. We just cannot be afraid in the church. We should be bold and courageous people, because everything that God says He wants done, we're capable of doing, and God is going to be with us. There's all the blessings of doing what God says, and there's no blessings for ignoring it because we are afraid. There's no blessings. God is not going to praise on the day of judgment for being afraid, for failing to do what He's commanded. So when we look to our own strength, that's why we become afraid. When we listen to the excuses of Gideon, isn't that what he's doing? He's essentially looking to his family pedigree. He's looking to his standing in there. And the idea is a person who of faith is not going to look at his own strength, but the idea that God is going to be with you. And when you have the trust in God as you're supposed to have, then you can be confident that you're going to prevail in everything that God has commanded us to do. Okay? And so, is there any justifiable excuse that Gideon could have offered to God for God to reconsider his choice of Gideon as the next judge of Israel? No. Gideon, you're exactly what I'm looking for. And I think it's interesting when I talk about an unconventional pick. The idea is God picks those that
Well, basically
probably,
are.
if you were to get the nation of Israel together and have them pick who's going to be your next judge, it probably wasn't going to be Gideon. And that's where it goes to show you that God looks at things so much differently than the way that man does. But yet, God is able to accomplish even the greatest thing with a man who's from the least family in Manasseh and the youngest of his family.
Well, Gideon should never tell God he had the wrong man, because God's perfect.
Yeah.
And stuff, God had the right man. God
Right.
knows, God's omniscient.
Right?
So, you know, all powerful too. So,
Right.
omnipotent. But, you know, God had the right man. and
Right.
He knows what he could do and stuff. So that right there was calling God a liar, because, you know, you're not sure, you don't got the right man.
Right.
You know?
It was the right man who had to get with the program.
It's just that he had to get rid of the fear, yeah.
Right.
And
The idea is that
doubting.
if God is going to be with you, God's omniscient. He's already chosen you. He knows you're confident of doing it, and He's going to be with you. you explain to me, Gideon, why you're afraid. You're either not trusting God like you should, that's probably it, or, you know, there's some other issue, but it's probably the fact that he's not trusting in God and saying, you know, here am I, send me. I'm ready, let's do what needs to be done here. So verse 16, the Bible writer says, but the Lord said to him, surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man. And so this underscores the idea that Gideon was afraid. It also shows how patient God is with him. You know, God obviously has to listen to Gideon sort of put all this stuff out there. And, you know, the idea is, are you kidding? You know, God is very patient with him. So he's essentially trying to reassure Gideon that it's going to be okay. All he needs to do is trust in the Lord. And God essentially is going to lead him and Israel in a victory against the Midianites. But Gideon has to be strong. And if he's strong and he is trust in the Lord, then he's going to be able to conquer the Midianites as if they were a one-man army. Okay. A couple verses come to mind when we think about God's people versus, you know, the challenges of against those in the world. And a lot of times we think there's so many people on the other side. There's so many people who aren't walking with the Lord. There's so many people who have given themselves over to evil. And in one particular verse here, Romans 8 verse 31, it says, if God is for us,
Who can be against us?
there you go. Who is against us? In other words, if God's on our side, who can really do anything? The idea is we've got the most powerful force in the universe with us. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 4 says, greater is he who is in you than
is in the world.
He's in the world. The idea is we just want to recognize that God is going to be with his people.
What scripture was that, John? What?
The second one is 1 John 4:4. And I just read part of the verse there. And so it requires faith in a time when essentially the powers of evil permeate the world. There are more people walking in darkness than light. The idea that is God is greater than all of that. And we need to be faithful to God and trust him, and we will prevail. And so what we have here in these verses 16 here is the assurance that God has given Gideon that you are the right man for the job. You need to rise up. And you need to
how
take care of business.
stupid to tell God that he has the wrong person.
Well, those were my words, but essentially he's trying to talk God out of choosing him.
Yeah, why would you do such a stupid thing? I mean,
Because he's relying on his own strength.
Don't be wise in your own eyes.
Right. He's relying on his own strength. Like, who am I? I have such a small position in Israel society. I can't be the guy. And yet God does unconventional things. Jenna.
So what was Gideon's job before he became a judge?
I don't know.
Just a farmer then?
Well, it sounds like, it doesn't say, but I mean, it may have been, you know, a lot of ancient people were tied to agriculture. I mean, obviously they got to eat. I don't know what his specific point was. Maybe it was all just about survival. In other words, we get our food, we grow it, we try to get it before the bad guys get it, and it was just about survival. We're not told exactly what specific job that he had.
He was referred to as a valiant warrior, so maybe.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the idea that he's somebody who could fight. So, you know, if we want to look at that and say, well, you know, he was a soldier, that could be. I think it's a vote of confidence that you can do this. And maybe, in the way I see it, is the idea is God is seen on the other side of all this after Gideon does what he's supposed to. And he's essentially telling him back here, well, Gideon is still getting news that he's going to be the guy. So it could be that he was a soldier, but we don't know for sure. But that's a good question. Verse 17 says, so Gideon said to him, if now I have found favor in thy sight, then show me a sign that it is thou who speakest to me. A sign is essentially he wants some kind of miracle done. And, you know, sometimes in the Bible, this is a good thing, it's a bad thing. You know, when the Pharisees asked Jesus for a miracle, it was a bad thing. because they expected him essentially to jump through their hoop and do something to impress them. But this is a miracle in a good sense. The other judges didn't ask for this. God doesn't seem to be offended by it. And apparently it's just more assurance that what he is experiencing with the angel of the Lord is true. Okay, so Bob Winton, in his outline commentary on Judges, and talking about this, says, quote, Gideon, wanting to be certain regarding his call and having no intention of putting the Lord to the test, asked that some sign be given for authentication. This was what Moses did when he received his call to deliver Israel from Egypt, Exodus chapters 3 and 4, and the Apostle Thomas wanted evidence that Jesus had truly risen from the dead, John chapter 20, 24 through 29. In verse 18, continues, says, Gideon is speaking here, he says, please do not depart from me, talking to the angel of the Lord, until I come back to thee and bring out an offering and lay it before thee. And he said, I will remain until you return. What does this say about the identity of the angel of the Lord? Who does Gideon see the angel of the Lord as?
God.
He sees it as God because he's essentially bringing out an offering and laying it before you. How many people do that in the Old Testament for somebody else?
No one.
This was done for God's benefit. Gideon has some awareness of it. Now remember that the angel of the Lord is a theophany. It's a visible manifestation of God. Okay, in other words, you can't see his essence. You can't see that part of him that no one can see. Book of Exodus talks about it, but this is the angel of the Lord can be seen. This is a theophany of God, and so he recognizes God. We're going to see a similar event as what we're going to read here in the next few verses in Judges 13 with the father of Samson. His name is Manoah, and he's going to do something very similar. And after offering it, essentially the angel of the Lord performed wonders before him, and then he sort of ascended in a flame, and afterward it says that they fell on their faces to the ground. This really indicates worship.
I guess I just had a side question on this. Like, you know, the pre-incarnate Christ, would that mean it would look like how Jesus would have looked as an adult, like when he was there?
Yeah.
Or like what does that mean?
We don't know, other than he recognized him as he was in a bodily form.
But I mean, that would have probably been Jesus, and it would have been like,
Well, yeah,
looking at him as like Jesus when he was on earth, or like,
right. Well, what I'm saying is, does he have the same face as what Jesus would on earth? We have no way to gauge that, and he would not have known if he saw that face from later on. He just had a recognition that this is not just somebody that showed up like a prophet, that this someone is beyond a prophet. And I think the language is written to where, and perhaps by observation, that this angel of the Lord, of course, is more than a prophet. So that the offering is a gift or a present, an offering before him. So let's read 19 through 24. I guess that's probably might be as far as we get to go, right? Do you want to read those verses?
19 through 24, yep.
Correct.
Then Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. He put the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot, and brought them out to him under the oak, and presented them. The angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread, and lay them on this rock, and pour out the broth, and he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand, and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire sprang up from the rock, and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. Then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. When Gideon saw that he was the angel of the Lord, he said, alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. The Lord said to him, peace to you, do not fear, you shall not die. Then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord, and named it, The Lord is Peace. To this day it is still in Ophrah, of the Abiezrites.
All right, so this one's all about that
So
sacrifice.
did God initially eat, or did the angel eat that food?
Well, it doesn't appear to be. It talks about him just putting the end of his staff. In verse 21, it was his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and then fire sprang up from the rock. So it was on a rock and consumed all of that.
Okay.
So,
Because someone years ago, she's a black woman, she told me that, which is not true, God came down to Abraham and ate barbecues with him. And stuff, which I didn't, at the time, I was like, oh. And stuff, and I wondered if God ever
corn
came
on the
down
cob and
I thought my preacher back home at the Pack Road Church Christ, he made a joke when I told him during church that too. It was a Wednesday night, I think. But yeah, she was that. I was like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
She was another.
I think
church.
sometimes people are confused or get the wires crossed or read into a passage more than they should, and then they come away with something altogether different than what it actually says. Yeah. Well, let's kind of get into this and kind of finish up before we run out of time here. And so, of course, the kid here we're talking about a young goat, and ephah of flour is a measurement. And it says it's, according to Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary, a unit equal to 1/10 of a homer. And they had various measurements in the Old Testament for differing amounts. So let's see, a homer here. Let's see, this unit contained 6 1/4 bushels. So it's 1/10 of a homer. So this is really just a dry measurement of the unleavened bread there. It says, and the angel of the Lord said, take the meat and unleavened bread, lay it on the rock, and pour out the broth. In other words, he's not going to eat it. This is all sort of being put out for a sacrifice. Then the angel of the Lord put out his staff. That was his hand, touched the meat and unleavened bread. Fire sprang up from the rock, consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. In other words, his offering was accepted. And then it says the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. I mean, this would be something very wondrous to see, almost kind of like that burning bush thing, although I think it'd be kind of cooler to see that. But the idea that you're putting out there and, really Gideon doesn't know what's going to happen. Then all of a sudden, all of this takes place. Unfortunately for Gideon, now he really is afraid. Verse 22 says, when Gideon saw that he was the angel of the Lord, he said, alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. This is like an uh-oh moment. Alas here indicates sadness, sorrow, disappointment. In other words, I seen something. This is what Gideon thinks. I seen something that I'm not supposed to see, and now I'm going to pay with my life. So the ancient Israelites had an understanding about this. This seems rather vague to us about, seeing God, and again, they're seeing visible manifestations. So they're seeing theophanies, but they're not seeing God's essence. But this seems to come up over and over throughout the Old Testament, where there's fear associated with seeing even the theophanies, because they believe that they've actually seen God and not a theophany. And of course, the angel of the Lord here said to him, peace to you, do not fear, you shall not die. And the idea of peace here is be well with you, the idea of your welfare. It says in verse 24, then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and named it, the Lord is peace. And this is probably tied to the verse 23, the idea that God was not going to kill him, that there's going to be peace and welfare. He says, the Bible writer says, to this day it is still an Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And what this means is at the time of the writing of the book of Judges, perhaps by Samuel the prophet or whoever it was, the Bible writer was, this this time later when it was written, this particular altar built by Gideon was still there at that time. Okay. Any questions or comments? We're going to stop there because there's another section of scripture for the rest of it. I just wanted to add a few words here before you pushed it, but
Yeah, you're good.
I just want us to sort of consider what we've had here tonight, because we shouldn't look at the book of Judges as really just history. This is what happened, but learn the lessons from the book. Put ourselves in Gideon's shoes and, ask ourselves, when God wants us to do whatever he wants us in his word in the New Testament, what is our reaction? Do we essentially say, well, I can't do that because of this or because of that?
No.
Or do we essentially learn from Gideon's mistake and say, you know what, God obviously knows I'm capable of doing it. What I need to do instead of fear is trust God and just do what he says. If I do that, I'm going to be
Try our
blessed.
best to do what he
God's
says.
work is going to be advanced if I'm doing what God wants me to do. And really, that's what it's about. The idea is the success of the Lord's cause. Brother Ricky?
Try our best to do what he says. If he
Yeah.
convicts you to do something
Yeah.
and stuff, or not do something,
Yeah.
and that you can't understand. God does convict people of things, and of right and wrong and stuff, and things you need to do in your life. And he does convict us about, things we need to do for our study and other things, and faith and stuff. And we should try our best to
Right.
understand, pray. Prayer is what really,
Right.
in setting what grows your
Yeah.
faith and
We-
stuff.
We should learn too, and real quickly before we end too, that we shouldn't make excuses to God when God has chosen us to do his work. That even though they may sound like legitimate excuses to us, that doesn't necessarily mean they're legitimate excuses. That there is no really excuse for doing anything less than what God says. I want to thank those who watch the video. Hope that it'll be a blessing to your life as you pursue Christ. God bless you.